I love sleeping. My father was a great sleeper. My younger brother was a great sleeper. Must be in our genes. But sleep's my favourite occupation. I sleep after lunch every day, except today, where I'm talking to you. I had a very loving childhood. My father was an engineering draftsman. My mother was a singer. They both came from a deeply Methodist background, and the choir played a very important part in her life. My early memories are of the Messiah and the creation. My first awareness, conscious awareness of the nature of sound was my father. He was a fabulous whistler. He could do it with or without his fingers, single fingers and double fingers. And we used to go on Sunday morning walks. We used to go through this long tunnel, and we always used to ask my father to whistle. And I noticed that when he whistled on the pavement, it was different to when he went into the centre and whistled. And I think that was the first time I began to be aware of sound in an enclosed or semi-enclosed space. I was into jazz, and I started going to concerts before I left school. And one of the first was Watford Town Hall. Of course, had a great acoustic. And listening very carefully in many, many halls, many concert halls. I remember talking to Hobbs, who was the one who persuaded me to join Arup, because I'd never been to a university, thinking of going and doing a degree in English. And it was when I mentioned that, he said, "Why don't you apply to Arup?" And I said, "Oh, they're far too intellectual for me." And the next day he rang me up and he said, "I fixed you an interview." And it was an extraordinary interview, because he said, "What shall I ask you?" So I said, "Well, you could ask me if I'm qualified." And "Are you?" I said, "Yes, I'm a chartered structural engineer." Oh, then he thought a bit. He suddenly looked up and he said, "Are you intelligent?" And I said, "Well," he said, "Oh, that's a silly question, isn't it?" And I said, "Well, it's not one I can answer." And then he said, "Well," he said, "I think you've got a nice sort of face and will fit in." And they eventually offered me a job, and it did. It changed my life entirely, because the atmosphere was so different. In many ways, you were left on your own. Although there was a general direction, and one absorbed, I think, I hope, very quickly what I might call the ethos of the firm, you were left your own devices. There wasn't a sort of bogus management system. Arup at that time didn't have anybody really with a thorough steelwork background, and I got involved in one or two jobs they had some problems with on steelwork. And then I got involved in factories. Suddenly, out of the blue in '65, Ovi had a letter from the Albury Festival saying they had the possibility to convert a malt house in Snape into a concert hall, and would we survey it and say whether it was possible. Ove rang me up. He said, "You better go and see them." I remember he just said that. So I went along. I went down and met Britton and Pierce and walked round it and thought, gosh, it's in a terrible state. All Britain said was I would like it as full as possible for the volume. So I decided to go for 10 cubic metres per seat, and that meant raising the walls another metre, which we did. And everybody liked it. The phone went about 7 o'clock. I think it was on a Sunday morning. And Jean came rushing up. She said, Snape has burnt down. Jean and I got in the car and drove up and met Britton and Piers on the wet ashes. And I had a cry. He said, it's all right, I've got over it, Derek, now. We'll start building it straight away. So I thought, oh, getting all the drawings out. And I said, just as it was. He said, just as it was, exactly as it was. And it was back in 42 weeks, which was marvellous. And in a way, it was the beginning of being asked to do many musical buildings that followed. Then I got to know Richard Cowell. He did measurements for us on Snape. It was he who came to see me one day and suggested that we really ought to be doing acoustics in Arups. And so Arup Acoustics was launched. I always think it was yesterday, but it's May the 1st, 1980. Later on, when you began to work with many other architects, I was intrigued that they were very concerned with every aspect of the building, but not really what it sounded like. And I remember somebody saying to me, well, you see, they can't see it. And if they can't see it, it doesn't impinge on the design. The sound of anything is as important to me as the surface and the feel. You know, it's all part of the feel. It's important because our ears define, for me, the nature of space. There's something about conformity in establishments that I find, well, disturbing. Really, I'm an anarchist at heart. You know, they have an Arup graduate school, and I always used to give a lecture, and the last lecture I gave was how to waste time. And I mean wasting time in a creative way. And idleness is very, very important. And there are lots of young people now, you know, there appears to be extraordinary pressure that they've got to be at it all the while and eating sandwiches in front of the computer. I think that relaxing and thinking about things and talking about things and a bit of idleness, very important.